For today's video, we're going to be discussing the concept of dissonance and how it relates to video games and why certain amounts of it can be seen as being good while others not so much. The concept of dissonance has been something that's been around the game industry now for many years. It's just something that we've been talking more and more about over this last console generation, or really hardware generation, as video games began to take on near photorealistic levels of detail, and there was a general push to make video games more artistic or more story-driven. But you don't know what we're talking about. Dissonance, or as it's commonly referred to as ludonarrative dissonance, is this idea of a clashing between the game elements and the story or narrative. And there's been many of people who have talked about this. It's become kind of the game industry equivalent of somebody who takes one psychology course in college and now knows how to solve everybody's problems. And it does make it a little bit harder to talk about, because some view dissonance as this dirty little secret that's going to ruin a game. Other people feel that who the hell cares about it. But dissonance in its many ways, shapes, and forms is not immediately a deal breaker, and it really comes down to how the game handles it, and if at all. But as we were saying, dissonance began really in the early days of the game industry, is that suspension of disbelief when it comes to playing a game. We don't need to wonder, does Princess Toadstool run the Mushroom Kingdom? Is she just a token figurehead? Or in Dark Souls, why nobody thought to, I don't know, maybe it's make more of that Estus flask to go around. It's those common, or those little tiny details that we just let go because we're enjoying the game so much. We don't care in Borderlands how our characters can just keep reviving again and again through the Digistruct or whatever that machine was, and nobody else thought to maybe, have a few more of those around. But, like we're saying, when video games began to push towards a greater level of realism with storytelling, or just trying to become more grounded in reality, these elements start to kind of push back. And like I said a few minutes ago, it's not a case where dissonance immediately equals bad design. But it is one of the things you have to kind of think about, especially if you're trying to frame your game a certain way. We can see this in many titles that came out in the last few years. Uncharted is a good example. Nathan Drake is a happy-go-lucky guy who just so happens to kill hundreds and hundreds of people in his pursuit for treasure. And he can also seem to take lots and lots of bullets, and none of them hit them until that one very lucky one. Now, dissonance and abstraction, in a sense, go hand in hand. An abstraction being this concept of the game trying to break down or streamline a concept. Again, health in a video game is considered abstracted. The chance of you striking an enemy is one, and things along those lines. But like the topic for today with Division, and with a lot more quote-unquote realistic games, when you start combining action-based gameplay with abstraction, you start to see dissonance from a gameplay point of view. And this is where it can become a lot harder of a sell. As I was saying, when we talk about dissonance from a storytelling perspective, we kind of let it go. Again, we don't care where Mario lives in the Mushroom Kingdom or where we get all those Phoenix Downs from in Final Fantasy. We're just here for a good time. But when the gameplay begins to clash with the story or the situation, this dissonance can begin to affect things. Final Fantasy, or JRPGs in general, have dealt with this for a very long time with its level of dissonance. And that is the fact that you can have all these crazy spells and items and buffs and debuffs, but the majority of them were pretty much useless when it came to boss fights. And like we said, if an item doesn't work in all situations, it's not really something you can use. And when we look at modern day games, especially those of the quote-unquote role-playing shooter variety, then we can start to see where this dissonance can come into play. In both Borderlands and Division, both series deal with real-time combat. You are running around and shooting enemies as you would in Call of Duty, Battlefield, or pick any first-person shooter in the last 30 years. But where these games differ is with the act of the abstraction. The fact that you have characters and guns with level on them, or leveling systems. It's not just you shooting an enemy in the head and they go down. You shoot them in the head and you'll see a few numbers fly up over their head. And that is certainly not how things work in real life. Now, when we talk about abstraction in games, like we said, every video game ever made has some level of abstraction. Even the old school first-person shooters like Doom, Quake, Blood, and so on had an abstracted based system behind them. You just don't really see or experience it because you're too busy running around shooting enemies to crazy music and monsters. But with games today, and how they try to represent things in both a realistic standpoint, or quote-unquote realistic, while still having the abstracted progression as a form of a progression curve and a leveling system, it begins to, I think, wear itself thin to some extent. And we're going to switch to some footage of The Division 2 to talk a little bit more about this. But before we do that, one final point. Like we were saying, the dissonance in games is not automatically a bad thing. Every video game has I keep saying division when I'm saying dissonance. Say that 10 times fast. But every game has dissonance. But when you're trying to present things to the player in a certain way, and it's clashing with the design, it runs to that situation where you're kind of getting like incorrect feedback from your brain. Like you're saying stop and everything is going. And when the gameplay begins to create that level of dissonance is when it starts to get very weird or awkward to play. If you're playing a platformer and when you press the jump button the character doesn't immediately jump, there is some level of dissonance there. Maybe the character has to spend like a second and a half to kind of get ready to jump. Or maybe the button input is just not working. But when you want the game to do something and the game is not doing it, that level of dissonance can be very annoying and can begin to really wear down the experience around you. And as we're going to switch to the Division 2 next, it can also begin to affect things as the game goes on, especially when it comes to quote-unquote endgame content, and both The Division and Borderlands have ran into this issue. But before we get to that, as always, a quick word, I guess, to our sponsors. And now for a quick thank you to our Patreon backers, as well as to our current Game Wisdom sponsors. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. If you're a fan of Game Wisdom and looking for a little bit of collectible swag, anyone who donates $25 or more via Super Chat or on patreon.com/WBycer will get your hands on this lovely little Josh box. This is a hand-detailed box that comes with a USB drive containing 10 hours of some of my favorite podcasts done throughout the years. This is only available for the month of April 2019. Afterwards, we'll have to weigh in and see if people want more Josh boxes in the future. So if you're interested, be sure to get those donations in now before this offer runs out. The Division franchise was designed explicitly around being a looter shooter. While it may look like your regular run-and-gun third-person shooter, the game itself draws heavily from RPG levels of abstraction. Everybody has a level to them, gear has stats to it, and our friend over here that I'm playing as, right now is just trying to deal with some guys even to their level. And with the Division's design, it probably draws the closest parallel to the Borderlands franchise, that again was primarily built on action-based design, but had this RPG layer of abstraction. So right here, as you can see, I am trying to do my damnedest to shoot this person, and when it comes to the Division, it runs into that issue of dissonance in how what you see is not entirely how things actually work. Now, this game plays itself as being a very somber, tale, again, that techno thriller, pro-democracy kind of storyline that we see from Tom Clancy. But in this game, I am shooting people in the face with bullets, and they shrug it off. As you saw right there, I shot that person in the head several times, and all we saw was a health bar continue to tick down. There is no in-universe explanation for it. A lot of these people aren't wearing face masks or helmets. I am just shooting them in the face, and they're shrugging it off. And I know what you're saying right now. Well, I can do the same thing. But that's kind of the point, and where the dissonance begins to get very weird. As we said in the last part, all video games have some measure of dissonance to their design. But when you're trying to tell a serious story or base it in the real world, the dissonance begins to feel very off. Now, as you can see right here, I'm picking up some gear. And again, this is a universe where two guns are the exact same make and model. One shoots its bullets a little bit harder than the other based on some abstract level. And the game, when we get to this level of dissonance, this is where you start to see the designer's hand, I guess, starting to control the experience. And to show what I mean, I'm going to quickly cut to some other footage of me being taken down thanks to the leveling system. As I move through here, you're going to see an enemy approach me that is higher level. It is the same kind of enemy that I fought countless times before, but because of the abstraction at play here, and again, notice I'm shooting that person in the arms and in the chest with guns here, they just one-shotted me. There is no change in terms of strategy, no change in terms of their appearance, but simply by that RPG layer, that automatically determined that I was going to lose. It's a similar issue that I ran into with the new God of War game, and how what the game did was any enemies that were 4 levels or higher than Kratos was a one-shot. Didn't matter the difficulty, didn't matter your gear or tactics. If they hit you one time, they were going to kill you. And that, again, is where this dissonance of gameplay comes into factor. As we switch the footage here, again, you'll see the enemies of various elite status, normal, elite, and then kind of like named or boss class. And there is no distinguishing feature other than their level that dictates just how strong they are and how many bullets they can take. And like we said, there's a big reason why games have gone this way, because it creates a very attractive progression curve. The same thing we see in any MMO-based or RPG system. And it works. But when you're trying to combine action-based gameplay and abstraction, again, it starts to, I think, hurt the experience in the long run. Because what I'm doing 30, 40 hours from now in the Division 2 or in the Borderlands franchise or you name it, is exactly the same. I'm shooting guys in the face with a gun. All that's really changing is how many bullets it takes for them to kill me, how many bullets it takes for me to kill them. And when that scaling starts to get affected, it can make the experience feel very slow or cumbersome. In Borderlands 2, for instance, the endgame really slowed down, as enemies were just able to shrug off your bullets and kill you very fast until you hopefully found some upgrades to get your stats to their level. The same thing happened with the Division 1 for me, that once the gear rated system or gear rating system began to take effect, if I wasn't equipping gear to that level or to the level of the enemies I was fighting, there was no way I was going to beat them. Didn't matter how skilled I was, didn't matter how good I was at shooting. Because of some abstracted number, I was screwed. And this is a difference, or a game that I really liked that handled the dissonance, was Stalker, Shadows of Chernobyl. And when it comes to handling dissonance or dealing with it, there are two, I think, strong ways of doing it. The first is to go all in. We're talking, fourth wall breaking, I think it's an old writing term, hanging a lantern on it levels of just completely breaking the immersion. We know it's a video game. You know it's a video game. Who the heck cares? You want to teleport in and out of combat? Go for it. You want characters who can regenerate health for no reason? That's fine. And basically it's essentially like Deadpool, I guess, in that level. And again, we see this in a lot of old school and 2D style games. We don't care how characters heal by eating, random wall meat or picking up a random potion. They just heal. And nobody questions it. Now, the other way, and what's a lot harder to do, but can sometimes elevate a title, is kind of hiding the dissonance or downplaying it in favor of in-universe explanations. Borderlands handled this to some extent with like kind of the Digistruct system, the revive mechanic, the different guns and their manufacturers. But Stalker, I think, did it even more elegantly than that. What they did was they still had the progression of power and gear. You start the game off with little pistols and broken down shotguns, and by the end you're wearing next-gen armor and highly advanced military rifles. But with that progression, there is no RPG layer, or no RPG layer that the player can see. You're not leveling up in Stalker. You're not shooting 50 guys to raise your handgun stat by 2 points. Instead, all manner of abstraction and progression is built into the gear itself. When you're starting out in the game, the early enemies are hard not because of some abstract leveling system or rating, but simply because you're using a broken or using low quality guns to fight low quality enemies. When you get later into the game, you're not still fighting the same bandits or mutant dogs. You're fighting higher quality and newer enemies who are also stronger. The military soldiers you fight at the end of Stalker do not have anything special or different to them from a AI standpoint compared to the guards and bandits you fight at the beginning. They're again using higher quality gear, which then you can then acquire and begin to tilt the scales in your favor. But the point is that the dissonance of the fact that we're fighting enemies with gear and having guns of different qualities is mitigated by the fact that it's trying to be explained in universe. Of course, that crappy shotgun you pick up at the beginning is not going to be as good at the end, because you have, military grade assault shotguns and higher grade armor and things like that. And again, with a game like The Division 2 here, what you're doing is not changing. I'm still going to be using assault rifles or light machine guns or whatever, and there's no in-game universe explanation as to why these guns are suddenly doing more or less damage. The abstraction is just not mentioned at all, and it kind of clashes with this universe that the developers are trying to make. Another big example of this, I think, is the Tomb Raider franchise, or specifically the Tomb Raider reboots, that to me are some of the most overrated games of this generation. And again, it's the same thing as The Division here. The developers are trying to have their cake and eat it too. You want to tell this serious story about a woman, rising up against adversity and dealing with the horrors that she's witnessed. And then in the next second, she's leaping off of cliff edges to shank guys with a climbing tool, and then pull out an assault rifle and just go on a murder and killing spree for 3 minutes in an arena fight. Those two things don't work. But like we've said at the beginning of this video, dissonance by itself does not automatically make a game good or bad. But it's the elements that can start to, again, clash with each other, or expose, I guess, the man behind the curtain with your game. One last example, and then we'll begin to wrap things up, was with BioShock. The original BioShock, again, tried to present itself as a first-person shooter, but it still was heavily influenced by RPG mechanics. I remember the moment that the experience broke down for me was I went up to an enemy with a shotgun, aimed point blank in their face, and fired the gun, and instead of them dying, all I saw was like a quarter of their health bar went down. And that just broke the immersion for me entirely. And it's certainly a far cry from Doom, where you shoot somebody point blank in the face with a shotgun, chances are they're going to die if they're not a demon. But again, Doom has abstraction. but it's hidden behind the high-octane excitement action gameplay. And like I said, if you're going to handle dissonance or try to mitigate it, you either need in-universe explanations or representation, or just, say screw it and go all out. And it can be hard for developers to try and do that, especially if you're trying to tell a serious story. Again, one of the most famous examples is from Final Fantasy VII, where we have an emotional scene of Aerith being killed, but this is a universe where there's Phoenix Downs, and they can revive anyone from death. Those two things don't add up there. And again, most gamers don't care about this stuff, but it can ruin an experience or at least hurt it if you're not careful. And now to end the video here, here's my question for you folks watching. Can you think of games that handled dissonance really well by going over the top? Again, Deadpool levels of insanity. And can you think of games that handle it more like Stalker, by being all in universe and kind of hiding it? And before anyone says it, I'm going to point out that yes, the Blizzard games, or at least their early ones like Diablo and StarCraft, are great examples. So I'm going to kind of stop you there. But thank you so much for watching this video. Be sure to check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night. If you're looking for a book on design, my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, is out now. It is available where most books are sold, and it comes in paper, hardcover, or digital copies. This is the perfect book for anyone interested in learning about game design, whether you are a student, enthusiast, or just a fan. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.